All right, this is episode 2 of the Sound in Church podcast. I looked for a few different names for some things that we could call this, and at this point in human history, most names for podcasts are taken. So we're just going to go with Sound in Church podcast for now.
Hey, that works for me.
Yeah.
I feel like it's appropriate, right?
Let's go.
All right, well, how have you guys been this week? Good?
I've been good. It's been busy. I've got a lot on my plate, but how's your week?
It's been awesome. It's been really good.
I like the weather. Now that the wind's
Springtime.
kind of chilling out.
Yeah.
Spring break.
Yep.
It's good vibes all the way around.
Feels nice. In Oklahoma, though, we do have all the tornadoes. So we're ramping up for the reason why our weathermen are famous, which is we're all glued to the TV.
You can learn
storms.
a lot from watching the news, watching the weather.
Oh,
Yeah.
Like
Well,
a
it's
lot.
It's almost like our Super Bowl. Like people
This is
gather
it.
around to watch the storms and how the weathermen react to them.
I think it's
So-
a combination of what they say and their sparkly, snazzy ties.
Yeah.
They just know. We're going to be watching that stuff.
I'm just surprised they can stay on and have something to talk about for literally like 8 hours. Like they're on.
So,
Going.
in that vein, we're going to do that today. We're going to go for an 8-hour podcast.
Oh, Lord.
Lord.
All right. Well, I hope you're ready. Buckle your seatbelts.
8 hours.
Here we go. And I'm not even wearing a tie. Awesome. Well, I suppose we could start with some questions because last week I asked some people to let us know, like, what would you like to hear on the podcast? What do you want to know about? Take this opportunity with Jonathan here and Stuart having just a massive amount of knowledge. I've got a little bit, but not as much as you guys. You guys have been doing this for a while. How long have you been doing this now?
Have I been to a Sound in Church?
Just audio production, like production stuff. in
My
general.
goodness. Well, since about 2003.
Wow. That's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me it's like 2005-ish, 2006, something like that.
That's great.
A lot of XLR cables have been rolled with these hands.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like a lot of XLR cables have been made.
I tried to start doing this back in 2008, 2007, and the people I was working for were like, you know what, maybe this isn't the job for you. But I'm glad I found a home with you guys that have kind of
definitely-
grown into it.
That's the beauty, is that, like, there's a calling on everybody. But just having the opportunity to be around people that kind of help bring that calling out
Right.
is good. I mean, like, how thankful are you that those guys were real?
Yeah.
And we're like, hey,
You're not doing so hot. And what's interesting about that is that I've come back around to now, like I've, lived some life and approached this from a different angle. And I think, whenever I was 19, I was probably looking at it more like I knew everything.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh yeah, when you're 19,
like-
you know everything.
Yeah, I know this. I know everything there is to know about sound.
Yes.
And the only thing I've ever used is the PV console from 1981 that was in my old youth room growing up.
PV Mark IV.
that I ran a
Yeah.
5-disc changer in and played some worship songs on. That was my extent, and I thought going into real production that I knew what I was doing. And then my first day I was working in a Major League Baseball stadium going, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Did you have a Gemini dual CD changer that had the Q set up?
Yeah.
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 That's when you know you've made it.
You could program your playlist with the 5 CDs that you had in the changer, and you would have to go in and
Disc 1,
manually
track 8.
enter each one.
Disc 4.
Exactly.
Track 3.
So people don't know what that's like, or taking a cassette tape and putting it into the player, but it had a record function, and you could play the radio and record songs off of the radio.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. That was my childhood.
That
I
was
loved
my
it.
childhood. I had my own little radio station.
Yeah, and and even better is if you had some CDs, but your car didn't have a CD player, you could take that tape and you could make a mixtape.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So on that mixtape vein, I would call into the radio station
Yeah.
and I would ask them to play, make a request. And they would play that song and I would hit record and I would get those songs the way I wanted them. So my mixtape would be just what I wanted. JG's mixtape.
Why not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just being young, into music, like leaning into a passion. Like, why do I like this so much? Why am I pulled to music? And I listen to everything. I mean, some of the stuff my mom probably wish that I didn't listen to, but
Mm-hmm.
I just was into music. It was like, what's it all sound like? So I remember those days. The mixtape days were clutch.
Did you make any mixtapes, Stuart?
Yeah, I did. Actually, I would take like multiple CDs because I had like two, like I don't even remember. It was a Sony boombox of some sort, but I could play like a Garth Brooks album, like a Rope in the Wind or something.
Dude, that's a good album.
and then and then
I love it.
and then but I would do weird stuff. Like I would do like, I don't know, some sort of Rope Against the Grain or something from Garth Brooks on the Rope in the Wind album. But then the next song would be like Take Me to Your Leader from Newsboys or something.
That's awesome.
I'm extremely impressed with your knowledge of Garth Brooks album titles.
Seriously, that's my childhood
I
right
think
there.
Against the Grain was the first track on that album. Pretty sure.
Well, I definitely remember Shameless was on that record. It's an inside joke for my family.
Did you listen to that a lot?
Well, I actually made a video, a Shameless video.
I always thought it was cool because the Thunder Rolls, he played both parts, the bad guy and the good guy in the music video.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And I was like, whoa, that's pretty sweet.
He always had a interesting disposition for personifying characters, either in the lyrics or with the Chris Gaines thing. You guys remember that?
Oh, his like emo.
It was like an alter ego emo Garth with the hair.
And he had like emo hair and everything. That was interesting.
Did he bust any guitars in that? Because that was always my favorite part. Either swinging out off the stage
Yes.
or busting guitars.
I'm feeling very nostalgic. Because that, speaking of mixtapes, like that was the video, like that was the Music TV Awards, like ACM or something like that. And I recorded that on VHS and rewatched that segment so many times. Swinging out over the audience and then taking that Takamine and just smashing it. Which
is the best thing to do to a Takamine guitar.
Yeah, you don't want to play it. I mean, you sound like snobs, but we're really not.
You had the Takamine guitar where the sound hole looks like a guitar.
Yes.
And yeah, but like, I mean, maybe they were really cheap guitars. That's why he like trashed them all the time. I'm not really sure, but back to what you're saying about Shameless. I had a dog named Shameless because of the Garth Brooks.
Oh my gosh.
I wasn't expecting the podcast to start this way.
Well, next week, we're just introing for next week when Garth will be over here. So, Garth, if you're in the area and you want to stop by the Sound and Church HQ, we need to fact check some of this. So,
we could use the internet, but we don't want to.
Right. We could Google it, but you can get a good look at a T-bone by sticking your head up. I just take the butcher's word for it.
That's got to be your bull.
I mean...
Okay, so we have some questions that people have asked, right? Is that something that's...
Yeah, thanks for steering us along there, Stuart.
Oh yeah, we're recording this, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, so let's start with my favorite question here. What type of product does Jonathan use to style his hair in the mornings?
What in the world?
I think I might know a few things, but you go ahead.
We can keep this one brief.
I
if
mean,
you want.
Stuart, you're getting up on the mic. I'll go ahead and finish it.
I just remember one time, I don't know exactly what products you use, but I remember one time at your house saying that you have to blow dry it to solder it in place. You gotta lock it down. You gotta get it in. You gotta.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed. Like with my hair, if I add a little heat to it, it'll style better. And so since I'm getting up and going to the gym and I'm getting out of the shower, like I just keep with that model, add a little heat, add a little texture. No big deal though.
Yeah.
It's something in a can, whatever product it is.
I would agree because I do the same thing with my beard. Product, heat.
What do you do
Yeah.
with your hair?
It does it. I just shave that
Oh, okay.
because there's not a lot left.
My style is I just wear a hat.
I like the
works
hat
too.
thing too.
That
It's
also
good.
works. I like it. All right, let's move on from this topic.
It's making me feel kind of metro.
Oh, that's not what this podcast is
I'm not
about.
feeling
I
that
really
really.
don't care what you put in your hair. Whatever.
But you
whatever
said it
works
was
for
your
you,
favorite
buddy.
question, so I mean, you're just going off
I
of what
just
you're
thought it was
saying.
Kind of funny. Okay, so let's go with a more in-depth, interesting question that actually has something to do with audio production. Is there such a thing, and this is a multiple, like, tiered question, is there such a thing as a natural ear for mixing? Can you train someone to have an ear for mixing? How do you train someone to have an ear for mixing? And how do you train someone to specifically recognize what is missing or excessive in the mix?
Well, to the training somebody to have an ear and training somebody to pick out stuff, I think there should be like I didn't have anybody train me on what to listen for. Like I just, going back to listening to the CDs and the mixtape, I think part of the reason that I was so enthralled with music is because I was just trying to pick out those parts. Not
Right.
from a musician standpoint, but just like uncovering the way that like a sommelier would uncover flavors in a bottle of wine, right? By purifying their palate. So I was like a young child listening to music thinking, well, what's making that sound? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's years of just fascination and passion that goes into that. And so can I train somebody to do that like in a weekend? No, I don't think so. But I think you can help influence somebody and give somebody some information and a path to go on to say, man, if you're interested in developing your ear, there's a lot of tools. It's like developing your muscles or your mind with school and reading books. Like it just takes time, you know, to identify certain frequencies, identify what you're listening for. But I think there needs to be a bit of a predisposed passion or interest to be able to let that develop, like planting a seed in fertile ground. You know, if somebody's rocky, I mean, you're probably not going to develop like a real cohesive audio passion, right? Or a real technical vibe with that. But, you know, I'm not saying people can't be trained, but it seems like there needs to be something there to work with, some good raw material.
Yeah, I would say for those, because, you know, we spend a lot of time in churches training volunteers. So you get a lot of people that don't have that childhood upbringing or any experience, but they're the ones that have volunteered to run sound in their church. So I think the beginning, at least from what I can tell from the training we've done, is just understanding where to begin.
Mm.
So like what I like to say to people is try to mix downward first. So if you can't hear the lead singer, instead of immediately trying to raise that fader, before you raise it, just listen and see if, oh, that acoustic guitar does sound kind of hot. And then when you bring it down, it's like, oh my gosh, not only can I hear the vocalist now, but I can now hear the snare drum and the kick drum and the other guitar player and the bass player. And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that acoustic guitar was really loud.
Yeah, subtractive
and it was
mixing.
Yeah, it was covering up some
good.
stuff. So that's just one little thing, but like I'll start there with people because it's a real easy concept. You don't have to know anything about compression or gating or EQing or anything. Just, hey, that acoustic guitar, it's a little hot. And guess what happens when you bring it down? You can hear other stuff. You know, so starting there and giving some people something to work with. And then giving them the tools to develop it over time and get to the point where they feel pretty comfortable making a mix.
Mm-hmm. It's good.
I like it.
Nice.
Very nice.
I did the same thing when I was a kid. I would listen to things, but now I played everything too. Like I wanted to play everything. I wanted to play drums. I wanted to play bass. I wanted to play guitar, and and so I would pick out different things, especially snare drums. I would like to know like what type of material it was made out of, and same thing with guitars. I wanted to know like if it was a Strat or a Tele or an SG or something, and I could get pretty good at like hearing stuff. And nowadays, like I'll listen to something like, oh, that's a Strat. That's definitely a Strat on the bridge pickup. You know, that's a single coil Strat on a bridge pickup. You know, and so it's just because when I was a kid, that's what I listened for.
You just conditioned your ear to hear not only like the timbre, but the sonic texture of those sounds. And that's the part that I'm referring to is like we can help people hear sounds.
Right.
You know, but there's resolutions, there's depths of field to that sound. And so that's where I like to be, is uncovering the deeper resolution.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of ways that simply just bringing up a channel for guys that are in a church with a worship guy on an acoustic guitar or a piano, man, bring that channel up and add some EQ and just sweep that EQ. Like, just practice it. Listen to what a filter sounds like with one octave Q, cut about 6 dB, and just sweep those frequencies up and down, and you'll start to hear it swoosh in and out.
Right.
And then you can develop your ear.
Reminds me of the analog days where you had the two knobs that worked together. One was the cut and boost, and the other one was the sweepable.
Yeah.
And there was no graph to look at. There was no RTA.
Yeah.
It was boost it, sweep through to find, that's the sound that sucks right there, and then bringing it down, and all of a sudden, hey,
you're onto something right there. Because how many churches have analog consoles anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Or how many front of house interfaces are just knobs without a readout? You know,
right.
So you're in this like audio visual thing, and it's become more visual because I can look over on that console, I can see the graph, I can see the cuts, I can see an RTA on a channel.
I can pull up the RTA right now on your mic.
You can see exactly what's going on. But it didn't used to be like that.
No, I know. 300 is sticking up a little bit on your mic when you were talking, and a little bit on the 1K.
But see, on an analog console, on the old Midas or a PM4K Yamaha, like,
You've got to be able to listen.
You got to know what you're hearing.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that kind of goes, with, what we were talking about last week with gear and, what gear to use and how to use that gear and all of that kind of stuff. It's like, it comes down to practice. The sound in church training and consultation, like training is just practicing.
Yeah.
Like I can show you how to do something, but until you take the initiative to go and do it on your own multiple times and try to improve on what it is that you're doing, you're not going to get any better at it. So it's really a matter of practicing something and being able to go, you know what, like if I'm trying to learn this, I've got to take it upon myself to really dive in and dig in, because I can't just learn it from listening to other people talk about it. I've got to figure it out and do it.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like I gravitated toward this, but like I was bad at basketball. Like bad. I was 6'1", same height I am now, 9th grade. My uncle was the coach, and there was 3 cuts to make the team. I didn't last past the first cut. Like I'm just not good. At that moment, I decided music. At that time, I was playing guitar a lot, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a musician. But I guarantee you that if I had somebody training, like helping me, showing me what to do, and I worked really, really, really hard, I could probably be average, pretty good. Like not like I might not be amazing at it, but like I'm sure I could be a lot better than I am now, enough to enjoy it and have a good time and start a Sound and Church basketball league or basketball team,
intramural
and play intramural, play other audio companies.
I'm down. Let's do this.
Maybe we should switch to baseball because we have a Dominican on our team.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't very good at baseball either.
You guys could pick the sport.
There you go.
Well, I'm under 5'6", so I'm out on basketball. It's just not going to happen.
Hey, I'm 6'1", and it didn't matter.
Well, there could be other shooting sports. Doesn't have to be basketball.
True.
Yeah.
We could shoot guns. Might be okay at that.
Archery.
Yeah,
Archery.
that'd be fun.
I like it. So I feel like this leads into our next question, which is EQing vocals with analog knobs, which we just kind of
Yeah.
touched on.
Yeah.
But let's really dive into it because it was two separate questions. So I think it's kind of funny that, we've kind of naturally gone that way.
I just want to know who has analog knobs, and can we come over and EQ on those knobs?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Well, I remember. I mean, go ahead. You go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say about this.
I mean, I remember. I mean, that's what I knew was analog consoles. Like, we've had to learn digital consoles in the past 10 years. And so there's a lot of things that are just as unique to the pro AV industry now, like digital consoles are, that it didn't used to be that way. Everything was a copper snake, multi-pairs, big disconnects. There were analog consoles that are 8 feet wide that weighed 825 pounds. And you'd have to have a console party to flip these things over and take the lid off. But
and now you can't give them away.
man, that's so sad. That's so sad. But yeah, I mean, you would have an analog console, you got a performer on stage, and you're doing a line check, right? So you've got the same thing that you see on all of your digital consoles is laid out in a knob pretty much on analog desk. So you've got your high pass filter on a nice desk. That's going to be a sweepable high pass filter. On a Crest HP40 or a lot of consoles, it's going to be a fixed button, probably at 80 hertz, maybe 120. And then you have a 4-band sweepable, if it's a good desk, parametric EQ on your EQ section. And a lot of times you'll have a concentric knob, a knob around a knob, that is your frequency. Then you'll have a gain knob that's in the center that will be your boost or your cut, but the layout is, the knob functionality is the same. They feel very different. An analog knob feels different than an X32 encoder, but the process is the same, right? You've identified that my vocal has too much 300 hertz. And that's identified because of the resonant frequencies that are in my voice that are inherent to this microphone and that might be problematic in this space. And so I think EQing with analog knobs or with digital encoders, it all happens because you've identified a situation that you need to attenuate a certain frequency or groups of frequencies. And so there's it's an ear thing, but you can't break it. So just sweep it and cut it. Always cut first.
Yeah.
I see some guys boosting first, and that just
does a weird always phase. On the digital side, since we were talking about X32, I always think of the over there the mall, the outlet malls. You know how you have the little tents, everywhere, or the Denver International Airport, one of the two.
Yeah, it's kind of a
and
similar
I see that those are not the EQ. That's
patterns
not
that you
patterns that you want. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I've noticed in learning from you guys about mixing is like starting with a wider cue and then isolating the frequency a little bit more where it needs to be isolated. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, there are a lot of times where you don't just want to cut a super specific frequency and pull it way out. You want to slowly get into it. And
it sounds a little more natural.
Right.
When it's a little wider and maybe even a little less. Like if you're doing major cuts, it depends on what it is. If it's a kick drum and there's all kinds of 200 hertz going on, then, get a little crazy with it. Shape it, and make it sound like it should. Like make it sound like it does to your ear when you're standing right next to the kick drum.
Right.
But yeah, when you start doing like real fine knife cuts, that's when things get real funky. And we could go into why. I don't know if we want to go into why.
Yeah, we could. But before we get into it, let's just say also there's a lot of EQ or tonal shaping that could be done with mic placement.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so kind of like our approach to the system optimization, which is basically in a nutshell, we just start from scratch. We zero out everything and start over because frankly, I just don't trust what anybody else has done. And I know that we can rebuild it mostly in less than a day.
Yeah, like we were at a church last week and the first thing I did was I just took all the drums out one by one and started tuning them because I knew that you got to have the right source.
Absolutely.
Like if you don't have the right source, then you're just playing around.
Mm-hmm.
Like you got to get the toms to sound like a tom, snare to sound like a snare, kick to sound like a kick.
Yeah.
Start there, then mic it back up and gain it up and put it through the system and all that kind of stuff. But I literally had this conversation last week with some friends. It's like we were talking about recording and my friend has like a bunch of Waves plugins and a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, well, I use Logic and I just use all the stock stuff because I don't care. Just give me a couple different compressors and some reverbs and stuff and I'll get the source right. And I know how to use a compressor and reverb and all that stuff. And I guarantee you I can make a good mix in Logic just using regular old stock plugins. And it's the same with the PA, like on a stage or whatever. Make the drums sound right, make the bass sound right, the guitars, the vocals, get everything, the source. Once the source is right, you're really not having to do much at all.
Yeah, there's something that there was a kind of a famous engineer, like studio engineer, that said, and it's kind of what you just said a minute ago, like if you have a good source, then play with the knobs and see what sounds good, because you can't break it. You can always turn it back to where it was. Mm-hmm. You could always put it back to flat and start over again. Mm-hmm. You really can't mess it up. Mm-hmm. So starting with a good source is like, it's everything. Which was also another question somebody asked, is like asking about, how do you set, your gain stages and your, how do you get, make sure you have enough headroom and all of that kind of stuff. Like all these words that people throw around, but like really understanding, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to have the proper gain stage settings? Or what does it mean to have, enough headroom on a channel to be able to like manipulate it enough to get what you want out of it without totally messing up your mix. So what do you guys think about that?
Well, just like this bottle of water will not hold more than 16.9 fluid ounces. You're looking at a defined volume restriction. And every PA system is a defined volume restriction. There is a max voltage capacity to any PA system. And so if you think about your max voltage and then you just start subtracting, right? I know that if I only have, let's just say 100 of any particular given unit, and you've got to divide that all up amongst all of your participants. Sometimes those participants might be a single channel for all of the drum kit. Sometimes it might be 8 channels for a drum. And then all the keys, the guitars, like all of that stuff represents a voltage allocation, right? And so there is a headroom to that, but there's also a max capacity to that.
Right.
And so what we like to do is just create a unified state so that on the console, your faders at unity are passing signal that are the same input signal that you're getting off the head amp. And so sometimes whenever we're talking about subtractive EQ and we're pulling down 3 or 4 bands of EQ on a channel, that's going to adjust the amount of gain on that particular channel, which is why we like to do subtractive EQing, because we can make up for that gain and balance that with a balanced tonal shift, right? That's what the EQ is doing, is shifting the phase and balancing the tone. So now we've got those channels that have adequate tone, right? So certain frequencies that might be like 300 taking up space, right? That's voltage space in this microphone that we don't really need to occupy, especially if I have other instruments on stage, like a bass guitar or a kick drum that might live somewhere in there.
Sure.
And so I just think that if you think of an allocation table, like a pie chart or some sort, that you've got different amounts of everything that's coming from the stage. Every microphone, every source device has a electronic limitation to some extent. And so, I mean, the consoles have a solo button that give you an input signal. They will, once you hit that solo button, it'll show you like a PFL, pre-fader listen. It'll also send it to your headphones. But that gives you a place to reference. And so if we need numbers and dBu variances, let's set our gain to like -12, -16, somewhere in there, using that PFL, because we know that we don't want that bass guitar to be close to 0, because that's going to take up way too much space in that predefined allocation. So we love to do this on-site, hands-on training, because there's so much that you could show with the fader position. How the gain structure being off, for example, like the gain being jacked up really super high, you go to move that fader and you're blowing it out and it's at -40, right? And those segments on the fader, right, if you look at the physical dimension, right, there might be 40 dB of resolution in like a 1/4 inch of travel. But then you move up to the unity and you have a whole inch of travel in the fader, but that's only 10 dB.
Right.
0 + 5, 0 - 5. And so, I mean, it's kind of like the old digital cameras. Like they wouldn't take pictures with a lot of information. And so the information that you did capture had to be really good.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Dynamic range, stuff like that.
Right. Which is kind of a similar situation. It almost takes me back to like, and you can still get this now. So I remember having a CD player in my car that was plugged into the tape deck with like the little tape adapter, right? And if you turn up the volume on the CD player too much, it starts to clip out and it doesn't sound good. And if you try to crank it up on your stereo, it's like you're getting all this like fuzzy, like overdriven sound, which is cool if you're like using a guitar into an amp. Like overdrive sounds cool. Doesn't sound super cool whenever you're talking about listening to like a full band and like music and like your main mix. And so you would turn your CD player down and then compensate by bringing the volume back up on your stereo. Same concept, right? You get the same thing now. We have Bluetooth going to our stereo. Turn the volume up on your phone too high, you're going to get a little bit of that clipping. Not as bad as it used to be with, your CD player, because you probably had some sort of output attenuator or something that was like boosting that signal. But you still have that. So it's like just understanding that whenever you're dealing with more than one thing that's sending not line level, but like you're actually like getting some juice out of it, you're gonna have to pull that back before you can push it up and get a good like mix.
That's a good analogy. Never really thought about it like that, but that's a good analogy, because we're always trying to figure out ways to explain things that can kind of get a little complicated to people that don't have any sound experience, because again, it goes back to we're training volunteers in sound booths in churches that are all shapes and sizes. And that's a really good analogy, because you could have a blown out mix from your CD player going into the tape deck, right, and the volume be super low in your car, because you got your volume knob in your car turned almost off.
Right.
But you've got your CD player turned all the way up. So you've got this nasty distorted sound at like, a real, like a level that we could be talking like this, and it would just be in the background, kind of quiet, or the other way around. So that's a really good analogy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm closer to I'm closer to the volunteer sound guys in terms of my experience level, right? And you guys are like the professionals, and I'm making my way in that direction. Just learning and experiencing and doing. And again, it goes back to practice. Like the more you do it, the more you can start to hear things and pick stuff out and go, oh, well, whenever I first started mixing, I couldn't just listen to something and go, okay, well, it's around this frequency. I needed to go and change it. I'd have to look for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can kind of hear it. I can go, okay, well, I know that these things need to sit in this range, and I can go and get to them quicker. But a lot of your volunteer sound people are in that world where it's like maybe all that they've really ever messed with is their car stereo. So for me, it always made sense being closer to that. And I'm like, well, what in my life is close to that? And I am a guitar player, so I have that like aspect of things that I understand, like, gain structure and headroom and all that kind of stuff just from like guitar amps. But looking at it from a standpoint of someone who doesn't have that experience, like, what would be the closest thing for me that I can use to create an analogy for? And that was kind of what I came up with. But yeah, so another question we had that I feel like what's really cool is like our audience is really good about like all these questions are flowing together. The next question is what or how do you develop excellent teams that involve a lot of volunteers? How do you get excellence? How do you get people to want to practice their craft whenever they are volunteers?
Well, I think Jonathan's really good at that just here. I mean, we're the only ones that get to work with him every day. But just creating an excitement and allowing you find things in us and you're like, go do that. Like I'm really nerdy with my Nerds Rule cup. And, and you're like, why don't you explore that nerdiness, that IT automation kind of stuff. And then we just figure out a way to like incorporate it. And now it's like, oh, I can create easy buttons for people, in these volunteer situations and stuff. So I think I've never really been in a position where I'm like the tech director long-term building a team of volunteers in a church kind of thing. But I would assume that if you gave people the tools and you were excited and you showed them, it's okay to do this, to try this, let's explore these things, and creating an excitement and a buzz, like that's how you would build something like that. What do you think? You're the one that has a lot to say on this topic.
I mean, that's building a team is something that like I constantly think about every day because that's what we're doing. We're not building the team necessarily in numbers. And I think that's a common misconception by a lot of the church people. It has to do with numbers. It has to do with quantity and size and real estate and things like that, which are not really kingdom minded, right? But whenever it comes to a team, like regardless of the number of people, like let's say that this was the entire Sound and Church team, just the three of us here. It's not, thankfully, but I would be required to find something that Josh, you do differently than Stuart does. And conversely, I've got to find something that Stuart does really well that you don't do very well. That way, we can maximize our output. So if I'm going to be plugging away, doing quotes, working on sales, I can't be organizing the shop or terminating all the racks.
Right.
Now, here's the benefit. I'm not going to ask anybody to do anything that I haven't personally done myself at some point. So all of these things that maybe aren't the glorious part of our job description, they're all necessary and they're all inherent. So even in these things, being in an attic, being underneath a stage covered in spiders or claustrophobia setting in, like you just have to do it. And I think when there is a leader or a director of a facility that can showcase that sort of mindset, that they're not just calling the shots, but most generals came up through the rank by being a fighter on the front line and being in the trenches and getting dirty. And so my thing is like, you just can't be a leader that's constantly clean, whose hands are never dirty. You've got to get in there and get dirty yourself and lead by example and do it with a good attitude, because that kind of fire is contagious. When somebody realizes that, like, hey, we're going to go do something, and it's not the sexiest thing that we're going to do this week, but it's something that has to be done, and you do it with vigor, then you just get it done. And it's just part of the thing. But it's got to come from the top down, because so much of what happens in the church comes from the directive of man, unfortunately. You know, not the directive of God all the time. But in the areas of growing our team, in the areas of developing certain production elements, I mean, it's a lead by example mentality, you know, and I think that's, if you have experience leading a particular thing by something that you've done before, it can also be daunting, because I've asked you to do things that I've never done before, and you figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's an exciting part of literally where we are at right now, is that we're being in a situation, an opportunity where we're pushing into untapped areas of our own inward potential that you will get to once you've been doing the work. Once you've committed to that process, you'll start to have breakthroughs, and little epiphanies will just hit you. And it's like, I could not have experienced this had I not trusted the process and given everything that I had to go into something. If you go into something thinking that you have to know all of it, it's never going to happen. How many times do we talk about just, you mentioned it earlier, we just will do it, we'll commit to something, and then we'll work out the minutia. Like, the details are no reason to not commit. Just get it going.
Yeah. Just buy a 36,000 square foot shop.
Just go for it.
Just go. That's me, man. Let's just go after it.
Well, I kind of want to back up and talk about that a little bit more, because you were talking about, like, how to create, you know, a culture that celebrates excellence. And your approach is to, like, I'm not going to ask people to do things that I've never done. I'm not going to ask them to go somewhere that I've never gone, which is just kind of what a leader is. Like, you can't take someone somewhere that you've never been. You know, if I'm trying to give somebody directions to, you know, something downtown in Oklahoma City, but I've never been there, I might know, like, vaguely where it is, but I can't tell you, like, exactly how to get there. Now, if I go and figure out how to get there first, and then I come back and I'm like, hey, I've been there, let's go, I can take you there. But I couldn't do that if I had not gone there myself before. So my question is, what kind of culture do you think it creates when you have someone in any position as a leader trying to take people places that they've never been before and have no idea how to get there? They have no roadmap. They have no, like, idea, like, what it is that they're doing. They're just like, you know, this sounds like a good idea. And then they're taking a bunch of people with them just on a whim. What happens in that situation?
Well, that's really exciting, because I think about the simple version of that, which is, the simple version is, you know, the church, right? If you've got somebody that's now a tech director and they're assigned this staff and they have people that are under them, hopefully that tech director has some sort of experience in doing some sort of production. And generally they do. There doesn't necessarily have to be a roadmap saying that you've been down that path before, but that definitely helps getting your team to start knowing what it's like to move around and to travel. But at some point, you're going to have to identify, where do you want to go? Like, now that we're all caravanning and we're all traveling together, we've got our rucksacks on, we're sherping our way up the mountain. But what if you find that your calling is to do something much greater? Like, I'm thinking about going to Mars, you know, and Jeff Bezos didn't have like a roadmap for the growth of Amazon. It just kind of happens, you know? And so I think there's two sides of that, you know, where you've got to have just a fearless approach to the unknown, and others will have a very fearful, mind paralyzing approach to what is the unknown. And if you're the latter, I mean, I don't know how to get out of that, because I can't personally attest to that. I just have a different former mentality that is like, let's go. Yeah. Let's just do it. You know, because if I don't know how to do it, then that means I'm A, going to learn something new that day. B, if I fail at that, then I've also learned something new. So either way, I'm guaranteed to learn. The flip side of that, if I learn and it goes right, that's a major gain just for self.
Yeah, I agree. That does go back to our conversation before we started the podcast. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to take risks. You just have to, you know, have a vision or a plan or an idea, and then be like, well, let's just do it. Let's just go for it. And that's one reason, I mean, one of many reasons why I like being here. Because sometimes we just are like, yeah, let's just do it. Let's see let's see what happens.
There's never going to be just one person jumping out of the airplane.
Yeah. Let's do this, and then let's build it and they will come.
That's good.
I like that approach. Because I think about the, you can't go where you've never been kind of a thing. And I used to believe that, but now I'm kind of feeling more like what you were saying is like, why not? Why can't I go where I've never been? Who's to say I can't go where I've never been?
It's where we're supposed to go.
Right. Why would I keep going everywhere only places that I've been? That does not promote growth whatsoever.
Mm-mm.
So maybe in order to grow, you do have to go places where you've never been. So,
and it could be big or small. Like,
yeah,
we built a video suite and we're like, let's start a podcast.
Right.
This is podcast number 2. I don't know how many people are going to be watching it, but you got to start somewhere. And, to be honest, like we launched the podcast last week, and I've gotten all kinds of positive feedback. I've had people, tech directors from, not in the Oklahoma City area, texting me saying, I love it. I think it's awesome. And that's just one podcast. So this is 2. So you got to start somewhere. You got to go. You got to do it. You got to take pictures for social media.
Exactly.
You got to.
I'm just trying to multitask, okay?
Yeah.
I think it was off camera.
It was off camera. That's why I said
But
something.
now everyone knows about it that I was taking a photo while you were talking.
We just blasted. I love the questions. I love that this stuff comes from people that care about their church,
right.
Care about their ministry. And so they're thinking about things proactively. And that's what it takes to sustain this kind of thing. I mean, it's just like with a projector. You got to clean the filter on a projector. Otherwise, the thing's going to overheat. And the bulb's going to blow up.
And then you call Sound of Church.
And we'll come down and
fix it
all up.
Yeah.
But it's just maintenance, It's maintenance for your mind. It's maintenance for the people, the team, And if you're just constantly going, hey, we need to be a little more proactive in this.
Right.
And there's going to be, I think, a trust builder. Like if you and I just met and we hadn't spent all of those miles behind the windshield in a Tundra with just a ladder doing installs.
Driving to Claremore to tune some RF.
Oh, my goodness.
That was day 1.
If we didn't have that trust, right, that history, right, which is, I think, is the thing that you're looking for with a tech team, is if you're fortunate, because not a lot of churches have like a team. There's a few people, honestly, like in churches that we work with, that are just volunteers. And so if you have a team, large or small, I think the first thing that you need to do is work on building trust with those people. Show those people that like you care about them as a person and you care about their soul more so than what they benefit your ministry, what they bring to the table. And I think whenever that is the thing that's at play, all the other stuff just works itself out,
Right.
you know?
I want to say something about the churches that have like one person or two people and they're small and they don't really have a team, but they'd like to have a team. They'd like to have somebody do the lyrics. They'd like to have somebody run sound, maybe somebody watch the live stream and stuff. The thing is, you don't need to be in the audio production world. In fact, some of the best people that you can have are people like what I talked about on the podcast last week was you're a waiter serving a table of, 8 or whatever. Maybe you probably have somebody in your church who is literally like a waiter, waitress, whatever, like somebody that knows how to serve.
Mm-hmm.
They probably will be a really good sound person for your church because they've already established how to serve people. All they got to do now is just learn how to the console and and do what we talked about earlier, developing your ear.
Right.
And I bet you anything, if you're in that scenario, I bet you it's easier to at least get to a point where you understand how sound works than it would be to understand how serving works.
Yeah, because the server doesn't know how to make the perfect risotto.
No.
The server just brings the risotto from the hot window to your table. And as long as you're doing that with efficiency, right? As soon as it's up, order up, let's go, take it out. And you're making your clients feel good. You're making your customer feel like you're on top of it. And that's the thing, is the attentiveness. And some of the folks that we've encountered, it's just a 1 or 2 person tech team. These are the most attentive people,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes like if you have multiple teams or multiple people on your team, what ends up happening is the sound guy's over here looking on his phone, doing this thing, or the pro presenter guy is like on a video game.
Mm-hmm.
So just because there's a few people doesn't mean that your production has to suffer. I mean, you could have one person running it all, and that person being super attentive be a great service.
Yeah. Yeah, so think outside the box. If you're a small church that has one person running sound or taking care of everything, maybe think outside the box and start talking to some people. Grab a people person, somebody that's always shaking your hand at church. Talk to them, because I guarantee you they would interact with the worship team really well. And then from there, it's just a matter of learning how to run sound or do lyrics or whatever. So that's the thing. Start there. The other thing I want to say is within our Sound and Church team that we have, it's very diverse, very, very diverse. And we've all kind of figured out our spot. And so the analogy I like to use is like, if it's like a let's say you've got a speaker on a sub, and you've got a high frequency driver, mid frequency, and sub. Well, our guy that terminates all the cables and makes everything look, all the stuff you see, all the cables that are dressed perfectly, he's like a high frequency driver. He brings the clarity. Yeah. Without him, it's just a mid-range and a sub. The mid-range might be the guy who, rigs the speakers in the air. He understands the rigging and how to professionally hang a speaker where it will never fall. Even if maybe if a tornado came through. But I was going to say if a tornado came through, but anyway.
Well, it's still going to be attached to the beam. It's just going to be
the beam's going to be
roof on the building.
And then the sub might be the guy that looks at the whole picture, that can kind of see the big thing and go, okay, we got to get cables from here to over here or whatever. Or that person could be a full range box and kind of do it all kind of thing. And we've got those guys in place. And that's why when we go do a job, it looks awesome. It's done professionally. It's done in a timely manner. Well, you can have those things on your tech team too. Like if there's a person who's really good with lights, but you have him over, or he naturally kind of gravitates toward lights, but he's never done lights because you have him over here running slides or running sound or whatever. So maybe kind of step back and look at what you have already and see if shifting some things or whatever puts people in their appropriate spot. Because if our guy who terminates almost everything and dresses all the cables was doing something completely different, it might not go as well as the guy who looks, who rigs is over here terminating cable. I mean, we all do it, but we all do our areas really, really well. And when we're all in our areas doing our thing, that's when things really come together. So maybe look at those two things as a tech team trying to build or maintain a team. Look outside the box, find people that may not know anything about sound, and then also look at what those people gravitate toward.
That's good.
So I have one more question just to kind of add to everything that we've been talking about. Is kind of a question, kind of just a statement that we can elaborate on. I feel like it's dangerous to approach anything, and right now let's just kind of condense it down to like sound. But whenever you're going into something, we talked about this earlier. One, it's dangerous to feel like you know everything and go into it with this attitude of like, no, I got this. I know everything and there's nothing that I can learn. But two, going into it and not thinking for yourself about why you're doing what you're doing. Going into mixing or any kind of production or anything and just like, okay, well, somebody taught me that whenever I hit this button, this happens. And whenever I push this fader, this happens. I don't know why, and I don't care why, and I don't need to know why. I'm just going to do it, and that's it. But then what happens if something outside of the norm pops up? You don't really know where to go because all you know is what you've been told is to push this button or move this fader. But, not thinking for yourself can get you in a position that's just really, really dangerous. And then you can't manage your area of responsibility because you've never questioned why. You've never questioned like, well, why do I do this? Or why do I do that? Or what makes this happen? Or what makes this work? And knowing the why behind it for me personally, and maybe it's just my personality type or something, but knowing the why behind things helps me understand how to do it better. So do you feel the same way, or do you have a different approach to that?
Well, I concur, Josh. I definitely feel that you are a guy that needs to know the why.
I need to know why.
You're a why guy.
Yeah.
And, I think the most intrinsic thing that is a parallel for me is that, like, I'm a why guy too, right? I'm a why guy because if that speaker's not making sound, I want to know why. And if that microphone's not making sound, I want to know why. If it's making great sound, I also want to know why. And so you have to ask that question. Why? Why this button? Why this knob? Why this fader? And that's what I tell people a lot of times, like when they ask, like, hey, what makes a great sound guy, like, or a great production person? Knowing what all of the knobs do is beneficial. It doesn't make you a great sound person, because we've had conversations, have we not, with people who insinuate that they know every single function inherently down to the motherboard processing capabilities of a digital board. Friends, it doesn't matter. Honestly, it doesn't matter if you know every functional aspect of the component level equipment, right? What matters is that you know how to assimilate all of those things into an executable task. Meaning, if something isn't working, why isn't it working? So it's a division of the problem, right? This is how we teach people to troubleshoot, is cut the problem in half, right? If you can cut the problem in half, then it greatly increases your chances of finding a solution, because you're not looking at the whole picture anymore, right? So an example of this would, let's take a microphone. Say that this microphone isn't working. Well, is it plugged in? If it is plugged in, what's it plugged into? What's it plugged in with? Maybe it's this cable. Maybe it's the microphone. But we go over a lot of things that you can try in order to dissect the problem, right? And I think that's, sound troubleshooting is a lot like life. If this isn't working, if I'm not making enough money to pay my bills, then maybe I'm not making enough money, or maybe I'm spending too much money, right? There's not just one solution. usually,
Right.
right? It's a combination of solution. And so I think that's where the intuitiveness of going beyond the button and thinking about the problem, the solution.
Right.
We talk a lot about like zooming out, looking at it from 30,000 feet. I mean, a lot of times I've been there, you're dealing with a high pressure situation. You got a festival and you've got 56 channels on stage that you've got to patch in like 4 minutes. And then you have to line check the band before they get up there and play for 10,000 people. And so you got to break things down real quick. And I always loved those scenarios because it was a time that challenged me. It challenged me to look into how can I store large amounts of data in my head, like memorize a stage patch, which is just a bunch of numbers and a bunch of unlabeled cables usually. And you have to think about it in a piece that you can put into one box and another piece that you put into another box, but then you got to bring all that stuff back together. And so just knowing what everything does and how it all functions, that's great. But I like to teach signal flow.
Yeah.
Right. Signal flow is the path that this microphone takes for it to get to your ears, and there's a few things that are involved with that. But if we learn signal flow, then we can learn troubleshooting. And if we learn troubleshooting, we're a great AV tech for a church. That's my opinion. I don't think that you have to be some hot rod gunslinger to be able to be a great sound guy at a church.
But you say we were the gunslingers last week.
We are the gunslingers.
Yeah,
we're sighted
you're
in.
the hot rod gunslingers, but it all starts with knowing signal flow and like knowing how to troubleshoot something. Because like one of the number one things that I've seen in the churches that we've been in, whether we've already done something for them or whether we're talking about going and doing something for them, is just and this isn't like a commentary on like their inability to do things, but the biggest problem that I see is that they don't know how to troubleshoot what they have. And it goes back to that, like teaching a man to fish, like you want to teach him how to do this. You don't just want to go and do it for him over and over and over again, which as a business model, like you could probably make a lot of money, doing things over and over and over for people and being the guy that like, well, I know how to do this, and I'm not going to give you my secrets on how to do this.
Watch to the end of the video.
I'm just going to that whole thing. It's like I'm going to just keep doing this for you over and over again. And if you keep doing that, you're never going to they're never going to learn anything. They're never going to be able to do it for themselves. And your goal that I've seen in all of these churches that you've been in is to teach them how to do it for themselves, how to go fishing for themselves. It's like you can't be there every week. You can't be in every church every week.
Right.
So teaching them how to do it is beneficial for you because that's going to build trust. That's going to have them coming back to you for the bigger things whenever you teach them how to handle the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time, we talked about like the previous production life, but man, I came up in an era where there were lots of dudes, like old road dogs, that you didn't get any of their tricks. You were lucky to be around them, so if you could observe and just pick up a few things, because they're not going to tell you what they're doing.
Right.
They're not going to explain to you what they're doing to get a particular sound on John Bon Jovi's voice. He's just going to do it. And if I happen to pick up on it because I'm there, good for me. But if I don't pick up on anything and you're there in the presence of greatness, that's on you. And that's a thing that I think we could all kind of close out with, is that, man, there's greatness all around us. But are we in a humble position to acknowledge or to accept the fact that somebody's here with a lot of insight, with a lot of knowledge and a heart to actually tell us what they've learned in 20 plus years of doing this? But sometimes we get to churches and the whole worship team doesn't even show up. And the singers don't show up, right? And the purpose is for a comprehensive system overview and optimization. So I'm befuddled about that because it seems like we're trying to say, hey, we want to build a relationship. We want to show you the things that so many people held on to and just refused to show us. But we've got this experience, this expertise, and this vision to spread around all the information of which we've garnered over the years. And so, I mean, that's my goal. But again, like you said, you can't teach a man to fish if the man doesn't want to fish.
That's very true.
And if the man doesn't have his own fishing pole or care to bait his hook, then it's hard. And I don't care to show that man how to fish.
You're right.
But if that man wants to meet me at the river, we'll drop a line.
Yeah, meet me at 5 a.m.
We'll rip some lip.
Let's do this. I love it. All right. Well, thanks, everyone, for listening to the Sound in Church podcast, episode 2. This has been great. Thanks for the questions again. If you have any questions that you want to ask us, feel free to reach out over direct message on social media. You could go to soundinchurch.com. We have a contact form there. Probably not going to get that one answered on the podcast as quickly. The best way to do this is because I'm the one doing this, running the social media and answering, a lot of this stuff. I'm going to see that first and be able to put it on the podcast. So that's probably the best way to do it, whether comments on photos or videos or our YouTube channel or whatever it may be. Let us know what you want to hear about. Let us know what you want to learn about. What kind of fish do you want to land? And we'll see if we can answer your questions for you and let you in on some of the trade secrets that Jonathan and Stuart have learned over many, many years of doing this type of work. All right.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Next time we'll learn what Josh uses in his beard.
I'll never tell.